On this edition of Taking Into Account, there's a new Arch Linux-based distribution called Endeavour OS that aims to keep the spirit of Antergos alive. Also, forget Windows, Linux, and macOS, why don't you try these alternative operating systems instead? There is a critical flaw in the VLC music player. It affects the Linux, Windows, and UNIX apps. Dropbox has added support for ZFS, eCryptFS, XFS, and btrfs file systems in Linux, but is it enough to get people that switched away from Dropbox to come back to Dropbox on Linux? I don't think so, but we'll get into that. There is a new version of Deepin Linux out, and the new version of Deepin has a killer feature that every Linux distribution needs. These are 5 stories that I will be taking into account. And the first story on the docket tonight is the launch of Endeavour OS. What is Endeavour OS? It is basically a continuation of the old Antergos Linux distribution. It's basically a fork of Antergos. So Antergos recently closed up shop. It's dead. But as long as community members are out there and want to keep the project alive, free and open source software can never die, right? As long as somebody wants to continue with the project, and this happens pretty much every time a Linux distribution dies, especially a big Linux distribution that has a pretty good community around it. You're always going to have, 3, 4, half a dozen forks of it within a couple of weeks of its death. People are not going to just let these Linux distributions die. They're going to rename it, fork it, keep it going. And that's exactly what happened with Antergos here with Endeavour OS. So this article comes from Forbes. This was written by Jason Evangelo. He writes, quote, "When the Antergos Linux project closed up shop, the community that blossomed around it decided it wasn't going anywhere." And that's, again, pretty much par for the course when a Linux distribution dies. Usually a few more Linux distributions sprout from the corpse. So this is not, so when these distributions go away, I know people get sad sometimes, but it's not always a bad thing. And in Antergos' case, I actually think it was a good thing because the Antergos Linux distribution was not being maintained well. It was very buggy. The installer didn't work. It was not a kind of Linux distribution I could ever recommend, like the viewers of this channel, to go try out, especially on physical hardware. I've tried to install Antergos dozens of times over the years, and I swear at least half or more of those installations failed. The installer either just wouldn't complete the installation, or after the installation, nothing really worked. Antergos was really quite horrible, and it was one of those Linux distributions. I often say, a lot of these Ubuntu-based Linux distributions and a lot of these Arch-based Linux distributions just need to go away. There's too many of them. They don't differentiate themselves enough. And Antergos was one of those. It was basically Arch with a easy install, but it really didn't even get that right. So I was not sad to see Antergos go away. I've said this many times, although oddly enough, no one ever got mad at me saying Antergos should go away. I don't know why. If I say an Ubuntu-based Linux distribution just needs to go away, people get their panties in a twist. But why don't any of you guys that get your panties in a twist about Linux Mint needs to go away, why don't you guys get angry at me saying an Arch-based Linux distribution goes away? It's like there's nobody out there that defends Arch, right? Arch needs more defenders out there. So I'm putting that challenge out there to you guys. Anyway, so we got these 3 guys that started Endeavour OS. Their first names, Brian, Johan, and Fernando. I'm not going to attempt their last names. Some of them are a little long. I'm sure I'd butcher their last names if I tried. Anyway, these 3 guys launched Endeavour OS. It is the phoenix rising from the ashes of Antergos. The distro welcome page looks really sexy. It's got a lot of noob user kind of language in it, as far as, quote, "Stupid questions simply don't exist in the community. We're happy to guide you through your system and the terminal commands from beginning to end in a friendly manner," end quote. So it sounds like the guys over at Endeavour OS really want to present Endeavour as not Arch, right? This is not Arch, go RTFM. We don't want noobs. We are very elitist, snobbish, arrogant a-holes. No, this is not what Endeavour is trying to do. It's basically trying to be new user-friendly. Any question is a good question. We'll help you get through your install. We'll help you maintain your system. One of the neat things about Endeavour OS is it's not the command line Arch install, right? This is a graphical installer. Antergos had a graphical installer too, but they had the Cinchi installer, which was, again, just horrible. It was buggy as hell and it never worked. Endeavour uses the very popular Calamares installer instead of Cinchi, and I think that is fantastic. Although you do have to be aware there are some bugs with these early editions of Endeavour. Apparently, there are some issues with manual partitioning in the installer. Other than that, things you need to know: Endeavour, much like Antergos before it, offers 10 desktop environments for you to choose from. The base install plus i3, OpenBox, Mate, XFCE, Cinnamon, GNOME, Deepin, Budgie, and KDE. What do I think about that? I'll be honest. I think one of Antergos' problems was they bit off more than they could chew. And I think trying to support 10 different desktop environments and window managers is a little much. For example, I think most people that want to install and run i3 or OpenBox, which are very minimal window managers. I think most i3 and OpenBox users know how to install i3 and OpenBox on any Linux distribution and customize it and configure it to their liking. They don't need, that being offered in the installer. Also, Mate, XFCE, Cinnamon, GNOME, Deepin, and Budgie, six different GTK desktop environments. Pretty much all of them based on GNOME, or some version of GNOME, either GNOME 2 or GNOME 3. Do we really need to support all of those? Not in my opinion. Then you have KDE Plasma. I get why you would want to support that. Overall, though, I haven't taken a look at Endeavour OS, so I really can't comment on it. I need to download the ISO and take a look. Again, I was never a fan of Antergos, but I'm actually excited to see what Endeavour is all about, because you guys know I love Arch, and I like a lot of the Arch-based Linux distributions out there. Some of them I don't, obviously, but who knows? Endeavour may be great. It may be fantastic. In fact, I may try it out on physical hardware and, on one of my extra drives in this machine or on the laptop behind me. Heck, I may even install it as my main production machine if I'm that impressed on one of the test machines. So who knows? And the second story on the docket tonight is: forget Windows, Linux, or macOS. Try these alternative operating systems instead. This article was written by Alex Cox and Brian Turner. Do something different with your PC, smartphone, laptop, and desktop. So basically, they want to cover some of the alternative operating systems out there that many people, maybe most people, have never heard of. And there are a lot of operating systems out there that are not Windows, Mac, and Linux. So the first one on the list is Arca OS, which is basically the last of OS2. This is one of the last of the OS2 projects. Arca OS, quote, is an operating system based on the last IBM release for OS2. While OS2 barely survives as a legacy system, that is true. There are still OS2 installations out there because of legacy applications that have to run on that OS. It's interesting. I don't know anything about Arca OS. I'll be honest, I had never heard of Arca OS before it was recommended in this article. Maybe I should check it out. Arca, by the way, is 32-bit only. It's 32-bit OS that runs on the x86 processor architecture, so should be compatible with some of the really old hardware out there. The native file system is JFS. That's interesting, but it can work with FAT12, FAT16, or FAT32. Moving on, Haiku. Haiku is basically BOS. BOS Reborn. I have covered Haiku on the channel. I did a review of Haiku at one point, and it actually is not a bad operating system. And it worked. I installed this thing on one of my laptops, and Wi-Fi worked, and things that a lot of Linux distributions can't get right. Haiku got right. Haiku is really kind of stylish in a retro sort of way. It had beautiful icon sets and, things. I know it's just aesthetics, but it was really one of the cool things about BOS and Haiku, as a successor to BOS. But BOS especially was very innovative at the time. And a lot of the features that it introduced way back when were eventually implemented in Windows, Mac, and Linux. The next operating system from the article is React OS, which is an alternative to Windows Server 2003. This is basically a free and open source Windows, but it's not really Windows. It is reverse engineered because, of course, Windows proprietary software, nobody can see that code. So it's designed to work with Windows software. There's no Microsoft code at all. It's completely open source, and it's free, as in free of cost. I have played with ReactOS a little bit in the past. I haven't covered it on the channel. The reason is it's been around forever, like 15 years, 18 years. It's been under development. It's still alpha software. By the time this thing is ready for a 1.0 release, it will be completely obsolete. Nobody is trying to run a lot of these ancient Windows programs that ReactOS would be appropriate for. One of the things you need to know, ReactOS is not going to run a lot of modern, like your high-end games, for example. No way you're going to get that to work on ReactOS. So why even bother? Just install Windows 7 or Windows 10. Now Windows 7, of course, will no longer be supported here within the next few months. The next operating system they recommend is FreeDOS, which is your open source alternative to the DOS operating system. Quickly to get through the rest of these, Chrome OS, we know Chrome OS. FreeBSD, finally they mentioned the BSDs. FreeBSD is the one they recommend for folks. Okay, I mean, it's probably one of the most popular ones, but I don't know if it's that user-friendly, but FreeBSD. Solaris is the successor to Sun OS. So Sun Microsystems Sun OS, which began as really a proprietary Unix distro, and it was designed for Sun's Spark processors. At least that's what it was designed for originally. Of course, the hardware that it supported grew, over time. Eventually, Solaris was forked into Open Solaris, and, the legacy lives on. Number 8, Temple OS. Wow. I made a video one time about Temple OS. It's kind of neat. It's kind of an interesting operating system. It's not something you can really use, though. Ecom Station, I've never heard of. Syllable Desktop, I've never heard of. Sky OS, I've never heard of. And that's it. That was 11 operating systems that most of them you guys probably have never heard of. But if you want to operating system hop, you have other things to choose from other than just Windows, Mac, or Linux. And the next story on the docket tonight is there is a critical flaw in VLC. The VLC multimedia player, this critical flaw, it affects Linux, Windows, and the Unix apps as well. So this article comes from the Inquirer, and quote, the German security agency CERT Bund has uncovered a critical flaw in the VLC media player that could enable hackers to access and modify data on devices. So CERT Bund has not yet observed the vulnerability being exploited in the wild by attackers, though exploits will almost certainly emerge in the coming days, I would imagine, especially considering that this is for all the various VLC clients out there, Linux, Windows, even Unix distributions. So this new flaw, it exists in VLC version 3.0.7.1, which is the newest release of the application. It is rated at 9.8 in the NIST's National Vulnerability Database, making it, quote, a critical vulnerability. So that's a very high score. So that's a pretty serious flaw. So just something you guys might want to be aware of. I know many of us, including myself, do actually run VLC. What can you do? Well, obviously you might want to patch your system if there is a patch available for this yet. I'm not sure if there is one yet on Linux. It doesn't mention it in the article. It says, VLC Media Player's developer, the nonprofit organization Videoland, is currently working on a patch. When was this article published? Let me check the date. July 22nd. That was 3 days ago. The patch may already be there, but even if the patch is not there, you probably have other media players installed on your system. I know I have probably 3 or 4 different programs I could play music and video in other than VLC. You might just want to avoid VLC for a while, maybe even uninstall it, use something else for a bit, or maybe run VLC in one of these sandboxed environments, maybe install VLC as a snap. I don't know if the snap would be safe from this vulnerability. I'm just throwing that out there, but it might be worth a shot. And the fourth story on the docket tonight is there is a new build of Dropbox that has been released, and this build of Dropbox has added support for ZFS, eCryptFS, XFS, and btrfs in Linux. Now, this is kind of a big deal because a few months back, Dropbox announced that they would no longer support most file systems in Linux, the only file systems they would support is unencrypted extend 4, which just shocked the hell out of a lot of people, including me. I've used Dropbox for years. I dropped Dropbox after they announced that. For one thing, I didn't like that they cared what file system I ran. Why does my cloud syncing service care what file system I run? Especially when you tell me to run unencrypted extend 4, but don't run encrypted extend 4. Why? Are you trying to read my files? Anyway, it was just weird when Dropbox decided to announce that, but this beta build 77.3.127 now supports those various file systems, some of the ones that they had dropped previously, like ZFS, btrfs, XFS. Now they're supported on Linux. Now, what was reaction like to this? Well, a lot of people a few months ago, including myself, we kind of dropped Dropbox, right? We went to other services. I tried out things like Megasync, which is great, works great on Linux. I tried, of course, Nextcloud. I have my own Nextcloud server. There's other services out there. There's things like SpiderOak, and there's a million cloud services out there. I mean, if you don't care about Microsoft, I mean, OneDrive is out there. You Google fans can use Google Drive. You could do a lot of things. But, I found this thread over on r/Linux over on Reddit. And most people just really, they don't care about this news. Most people, it's kind of like we've moved on, most of us, from Dropbox. Quote, Dropbox shouldn't be worrying about the file system at all. That's like movers worrying about my tile. It's none of your business. It's doing its job. You do your job. I completely agree. Why Dropbox cares about the file system is still something that makes me really uneasy. And again, I used Dropbox for years. But I just thought it was strange. So anyway, there's other services out there. Like I said, Megasync. You can set up your own Nextcloud server. There's pCloud. There's a million other cloud services. There's really no reason to use Dropbox if you're worried about what kind of scandalous things Dropbox may or may not be doing with your data. And the fifth and final story on the docket tonight is there is a new version of Deepin Linux out, and it has a killer feature that every Linux distribution needs. This, once again, is from Forbes, written by Jason Evangelo. Quote, Deepin Linux just keeps raising the bar. It's already one of, if not the most beautiful desktop Linux distribution on the planet, and I completely agree. I've said this for as long as this channel has been up and running. The Deepin desktop environment and the Deepin distribution with the Deepin desktop environment is probably the best looking Linux distribution we have. I say this all the time when we're trying to convert new users over to Linux. I think just for purely aesthetic reasons and this look and feel, we should be showing new to Linux users things like Deepin and things like Elementary, because they just get that part of it right? It just looks gorgeous. But some of the reasons people have problems with Deepin, of course, we'll get into, but most of it has to do with the fact that the country of origin for the Deepin distribution is China. Jason continues to write, quote, its installer has a simple elegance to it. I agree. The installer for Deepin is very good. I've installed Deepin actually on some of my physical equipment, the laptops behind me. Deepin just works. I've never had a problem with it. Typically the install is very quick. Wi-Fi and everything work on the laptops. It's actually a really good Linux distribution. But there are people out there that fear it. The people have real problems with Deepin Linux and with Rosa OS, which is a Russian Linux distribution, because those distributions, their country of origin, China and Russia, respectively, people fear that those governments, the Chinese government, is spying on you through Deepin, or the Russian government is spying on you through Rosa. I think those fears are a bit unwarranted. It's all free and open source software. You can vet the code. There's plenty of people that use Deepin. So if Deepin was doing anything really scandalous, we would know. Somebody would find out and report on it, especially with Deepin. So many eyeballs on it because a lot of people are really scrutinizing Deepin. So what is the killer feature that Jason Evangelo writes in the new Deepin? Well, he writes, quote, there's a subset of Linux users who use the same distro on multiple PCs. So you have a bunch of machines, like I have a bunch of machines. I'm running different distributions on them, though. But a lot of people, they run the same distribution on all their machines. And what Deepin has is this new cloud sync feature that really makes, syncing your systems between all those machines so much easier. It's called Deepin Cloud Sync. It lets you sync all kinds of system settings to the cloud automatically. So this is going to cover all your settings for things like VPN and Wi-Fi, sound settings, mouse settings, update settings, power, corner settings, all your configuration stuff, theme, wallpaper, launcher, dock, etc., etc., etc. So no more spending time tweaking and configuring, like so many of us do when we do a fresh install. We have to put everything back the way we like it. The dock is in this place and this wallpaper, and I'm using this theme, and these settings for my Wi-Fi and these settings for power settings, etc., etc. You got all that covered now with the Deepin Cloud Sync service, and I think that is actually a really neat feature. I think Jason Evangelo is spot on here. I think this is one of the things that other, especially new user-friendly Linux distributions should take a look at. Now, distributions like Ubuntu and Mint and Elementary, think about syncing all those configuration settings, all those config files for you. That way, you're no longer having to do what I do and many power users do when we're doing our window manager only installs, where I have everything, of course, saved in a GitLab repo, and I have to git clone my GitLab, pull all that stuff down, put it in the right spot. It would be great if there was a automated method to do all of that didn't involve, especially for new users. New users are not going to use things like Git. They're just not. So props to the Deepin guys for getting that right. And that was the fifth and final story on the docket tonight. As always, I like to end these episodes of Taking Into Account by reading a viewer question or comment that typically these come from Mastodon, my followers over on Mastodon. There's about 1,500 of you guys that are following me on Mastodon, which is great. Mastodon has become my preferred social media platform. And if you're following the channel, it's great because I typically post there every time I put up a video. So if you want some kind of notification when I put up a new video, because the notification system in YouTube, of course, is horribly broken. And one of the things I wanted to focus on is I switched to GNOME a few days ago. I'm using the GNOME desktop environment, which longtime followers of this channel know is weird as hell. Because I am a ultra minimalist kind of guy, and switching to something like GNOME is something I would never do, but I do this for you guys for purposes of the channel. You guys wanted to see it. I've been doing it. Juanito, he says, wow, the window manager hopping took an unexpected turn. You are right. But the question I wanted to read was Alex's. It was mainly a comment. DT, I feel like you need so many extensions that need to break quite often because the creators of GNOME are egocentric about their UX just to get it to look usable, that I rather want to use something else. I mean, even stock XFCE is more usable out of the box. So out of the box, I will admit, GNOME is not very usable. Absolutely. You have to do some stuff with extensions or with third-party apps. Like you guys saw me the other day, what I was doing. I was using basically dmenu and all my tiling window manager hotkeys to do everything just like I was in my tiling window manager. So it's like GNOME doesn't even matter. I'm barely touching the GNOME parts of GNOME. That's how I get by. I know it's a bit of cheating, for what I'm doing. But overall, you guys keep messaging me. How am I getting along with GNOME? And it's been fine so far because, again, I'm barely really using it. I mean, I've been in GNOME every minute of every day since I made the switch, but it's not like I use GNOME like most desktop users. So, again, I'm cheating a little bit. I know I am, but I don't know how not to. Like, I'm not ever going to be a point and click user. I'm just not that kind of Linux user anyway, that Linux desktop user. So unfortunately, I can't use GNOME like some of you guys want me to use GNOME. But just using GNOME, it's fine. I can live in it. I've lived in it for a few days now. I'm going to give it about a month and then move on to something else. Kind of like I lived in Plasma about a year and a half ago because of the channel. You guys wanted to see me get along with Plasma, something I'd never lived in before. And I lived in Plasma for 30 days and it was basically the same way. I got all my work done just fine in it. Did I like Plasma? No, not particularly. Same thing with GNOME. I don't like it very much, but do I hate it? No. I mean, I can, if my choices were I had to use Linux with GNOME forever, the rest of my life, or go back to Windows, I'd run GNOME all day long. Before I go, this show was made possible by Ansem, Chris, the other Chris, Dylan, George, Jack, Mitchell, Natek, Philip, Rob, Robert, Sam, Tony, and Willie. They are the producers of the show. Without these guys, taking into account episode 47 would not have been possible. I want to also thank all those fine ladies and gentlemen. You guys see all those names on the screen that help support my work over on Patreon. Without each and every one of those folks, again, this show would not be possible. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider doing so. You'll find me at DistroTube over on Patreon. Okay, guys. Peace.